Hello and welcome to our bite-sized recording on T Level in Healthcare Science, focusing on teaching and learning activities and formative assessment for the occupational specialism. So just before we get started, we'd just like to share a disclaimer. All information provided is correct as of recording of April 2023 and may not reflect future changes to guidance documents. Please always review the most up-to-date guidance. So my name is Tracy and I am joined by Marina. We are the Provider Development Officers. Our role is to support providers with CPD, focusing on teaching and delivery in the health and science T levels. My key expertise comes from teaching in FE, specifically health and social care qualifications, and I have used that experience and adapted key pedagogy and teaching strategies to support teaching and delivery in the T level.
Hello everyone, my name is Marina. I am the Provider Development Officer, just like Tracy. My background is in science, so I have a PhD in neuroscience with a medical research focus. The experience applying those scientific principles to address health queries. And teaching, I've taught maths and science, so really am trying to bring that enthusiasm for some of those trickier subjects into the classroom. The aims and objectives of this video. So we're aimed at teachers and tutors of the T Level Technical Qualification in Healthcare Science. We're focusing on occupational specialism areas. This recording will be focusing on knowledge, skills and competencies that we would like to highlight to assess in our students, ways that we can use formative assessment methods to track them, evaluating different forms of formative assessment, and involving students in those. So first, let's look at what do our students need to succeed? What areas should we be tracking and formatively assessing? We can look here at the kind of how the behaviours and build. Ultimately, we have our professional behaviours, but these build on our vocational skills, our vocational knowledge, and then that builds on our academic skills. So we should be tracking our student progress throughout this journey, ranging from academic skills to professional behaviours. We'll first look at academic skills. So how do we know what to formatively assess? Well, we can obtain these key skills by looking at the content holistically, reviewing the assessments, and assessing what our students will need to be successful beyond the T level. So the T level is unique in its assessment styles, and assessments like the occupational assignment will be something that your students have not encountered before. But the academic skills that they learn to be successful in these assignments will also support them in their career or further study. So we can explore these skills such as critical analysis, problem solving, summation and synthesis. We can see with these three immediately how they link with the occupational specialism assignments where students are bringing knowledge from different areas and synthesizing them to solve a problem. Communication skills. This includes verbal communication, written to different audiences. Study skills and that independent learning. Mathematical skills and capacity for independent study. We have a bite-sized video on strategies to develop these skills in your students on our YouTube playlist, so be sure to check that out. Now moving on to vocational competency, specifically the knowledge and skills. The specification helps us out here. We already have the content split into knowledge and skills. With regards to our formative assessment, when we need to know what to assess, we can pull these from the spec, and by grouping them into common elements, we can frame our formative assessment to span multiple areas. So here are some examples that I've pulled from the healthcare science specification, specifically the assisting with healthcare science occupational specialism. And you can see the knowledge on the left and then some skills that map across on the right. And we can use this to help create our formative assessment activities. And finally, we have professional behaviours. So these build on the foundations of the vocational competency and academic skills. So some examples of the areas that we can formatively assess in our students are patient-centred care. This includes various skills, including communication, working with others, good clinical practice, good scientific practice, and contributing to an active research culture. These are just some examples. You can come up with your own. These are things that it's important that we assess these in our students. They'll be developed through work on sim sessions and through their experience in placement. We want to see how our students are progressing and where they may need extra support. So now we're going to take a step back and understand the purpose of formative assessment. Why are we doing it? We wish to create work-ready skilled students. Now, this is because formative assessment extends beyond knowledge, especially for the vocations that are in high need of skills, like in this area. The second factor relates to retention of knowledge. This is not only for exams in the following summer or in the autumn, but applying and reviewing them on an ongoing basis so that it helps students retain and embed this knowledge that they will ultimately be using in the next steps on their journey. Also important to understand individual breadth and depth of learning, and that's required for employment and success. Your formative assessment activities will capture this journey for each student, and they will track how the student progresses in their learning, including in their industry placement. It's useful to track which interventions, support, and additional learning activities and which staff are involved, as well as reviewing progress against students' individual targets. Each organisation has their own tracking system with the results of initial and diagnostic assessments, existing qualifications, ILPs, targets and learning goals. So how you do this is up to you and within the framework of your organisation. What's important is that ongoing progress and development is tracked. Each student's journey is documented and they know exactly what they need to do to progress and excel in each aspect of their programme. Important thing to consider is, do you have a formative assessment plan? And have you incorporated that into your delivery plan? If not, that might be a helpful thing to consider. And how does formative assessment differ from summative assessment? So both are useful, and we have here a table showing that formative assessment is all about monitoring during learning and improving learning and that ongoing feedback. Whereas summative assessment is typically at the end of a course or module. It's evaluation response in ranks and grades, evaluating achievements, and it will cover large areas. So we're focusing on that formative assessment and highlighting, formatively assessing these key areas. So like I said, both have their value, formative and summative assessment, but when focusing on supporting student learning, we'll be focusing on formative. Now let's look at some examples. So I'm about to show you a colour-coded table about what's being assessed. So we have red for vocational knowledge, mint for vocational skills, and yellow for professional behaviours. So here's some examples of formative assessment activities that you can do. The key is to vary the method and type of assessments to keep students engaged, but also to capture the learning of students with differing learning styles. So for example, to assess vocational skills, we have observations, students creating a portfolio of evidence. But also you could have an ethics committee where students we get to observe students' discussions, and then maybe more suitable way to formatively assess students who haven't got a strong writing skills or who prefer talking and demonstrating. It's important that with all these formative assessment activities, we will be including academic skills as part of our assessments. We have practically a great engaging way that you can group formative assessments, and that is with formative assessment stations. So these are where you divide sections of the classroom and have separate different formative assessment stations, and students rotate through these. Each station would have a unique method of formative assessment that aligns with the occupational specialism assessments and grading descriptors. So for example, you could use formative assessment stations to assess or embed the same topic through multiple assessments, or you can assess different areas with each station. So as an example, for healthcare science, you could have one station where students create a risk assessment. Then they rotate. There's another one where case study would have themed questions or written clinical stimuli. Then we have a practical session, so students are using different skills compared to having written. One could be a professional discussion with a tutor. And then all students at the end could have a peer marking and reflection templates. So you can see how everyone would rotate through and then we all come together for this key skill of peer marking and reflection.
So moving on to exploring, how do your students know how they are progressing? Feedback would seem to be the most valuable when it can cause changes in future understanding. So at the moment, we very much do quite sort of feedback focused sharing to it with our students in regards to how they're progressing. But actually looking at future improvements in learning and on assessment work is a really key area and a key way that students know how to progress. So let's explore this in a bit more detail. When doing live marking, tutors can use acronyms to give instant relevant feedback to their students. So with understanding of these acronyms, students can make the most of their feedback and feed forward. So I would share, these are some examples of acronyms that you could use. So you've got like SAP for summit assessment, DIRT for directed independent reflection time, SA for self-assessment. And I would share these on classroom displays with your students to help support them with the understanding of how feedback is being given and what it is being fed back on. This will help with valuable time with yourself also as a teacher. This also focuses more on the processes rather than on the actual product. Now let's now look at the benefits of this. So recent research explored the impact of effective feed forward. It was found key benefits of students were more confident, it increased self-evaluation, it showed better engagement and even improved attendance. For tutors, they really got to build that student rapport. They had a greater understanding of learner needs and it allowed for regular progress monitoring. So the outcomes from this research, this exercise that was undertaken, suggested that feed-forward approaches allow students to increase their overall effort when attempting summative assessments and thus improve their performance, engagement and retention. So how do we get students involved in formative assessment? And how do we get that student engagement and self-assessment awareness? So students can design their own formative assessments, tasks. Tutors can create a table like this with some example sort of questions and tasks. And students can either choose 2 knowledge and skills. So it could be 2 knowledge or 1 knowledge and 1 skill. So 2 from the sort of mint colour and 1 from the sort of lilac colour. So these knowledge and skills is what Marina shared earlier with you. So I've just picked a couple from the performance outcome, but you would obviously have a much vaster list based on several performance outcomes or more specific to maybe a content area that you're looking at. And you would get the students to then pick from those, so 2 from mint, 1 from lilac, and get them to then create a task to sort of self-assess and formatively assess. Then you would get the student also to complete an assessment of learning as they go through the process and use this to evaluate. So this is an example that I've created of, and obviously you can create one that works best for you and your students. But here you've got the students have to explain how the choices they've picked link together. So increase an understanding of knowledge and skills and how they link together. Clear on what they're going to create. What are they going to assess beyond just knowledge? And how is it assessed, such as RAG or grading descriptors. And we'll look shortly at how to create descriptors that your students can use regularly. And finally, students need to reflect on the process as a key element to support deeper understanding. Another really great way to get students sort of engaged in understanding of what good formative assessment is and how they're progressing is using the graded exemplification materials with the students. So this is an example of the pass that we have here on the screen. So you give your students, first step is to give the students both the pass and the distinction examples without the grading descriptors or examiner commentary. You would then give the students the grading descriptors, and in groups get the students to mark the exemplar using the descriptors to support reasonings for grade. And finally, once they've come to a decision on grades, give the students the examiner commentary to see whether or not they agreed and what they would then change. Once you've done this for the first time using exemplification material, you can then use this again to support formative and summative assessment so that they can do peer and self marking and reflections. So let's explore how to actually create grading descriptors for continuous assessment. So you can collate descriptors at the beginning of the year into lower to higher band, which will support continuous form assessment and allow for efficient feed forward. Here are examples that we have collected from the Chief Examiner commentary and from the graded exemplification materials grading descriptors. And you can clearly see that adjectives used are clearly differentiated between that lower and higher band. So that limited or little versus excellent, thorough, analysis. And these grading descriptors, once you have created them, these can be continually used with your students, either from your perspective to use efficient feed forward or for the students to do that self and peer reflection. So finally, we're going to explore creating key themes using the Occupational Specialisms spec. And this will help focus formative assessment and the assessment of these key competencies and skills. So step one is to collate the headings in the performance outcomes. Step two is to then group them together into overarching themes. This will allow your students to bring knowledge and experience together across all performance outcomes. Step three is to create a scenario, so a skill session, a case study, with task questions or questions that students will apply experience and knowledge to. And finally, step four, use reflective performers at the end to then get the students to reflect on how effectively they were able to evidence and demonstrate understanding, demonstrate key skills and key vocational and professional behaviours, competencies. So I'd like to say thank you for joining us on this formative assessment recording. We hope we've been able to give you some strategies to support you in formative assessment in the T level. Thank you.
Thank you.